The images of the circle kept hammering in my head as I drove back through the city. The streets seemed darker, quieter, as if the city itself was trapped in the same darkness I carried. I knew I needed answers, and there was only one person who could help me understand what I'd seen: Ike Carver. When I entered the bar, Ike was already waiting for me, as if he knew I would return. This time, there were no smiles or friendly words. I sat in front of him and threw the diary and the mental images of the circle onto the table. "You were right," I said bluntly. "There's something in the Cecil Hotel, and I think Elisa Lam opened the door to it." Ike flipped through the diary with the same grave expression as before. "I warned you that place was an energetic convergence point, Morgan. The circle you saw, it's not just a common symbol. It's a portal." My hands clenched into fists involuntarily. A portal to what? Ike slowly raised his eyes, as if choosing his words carefully. Not to where, but to what. We're talking about entities that exist beyond time and space. They feed on the worst in people: fear, despair, darkness. Elisa Lam unknowingly invoked something, and now it's hunting. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. The weight of what he was saying was almost unbearable. I had seen inexplicable things before, but this was different. Whatever was in the hotel, and now inside me, was something beyond what I could control. "How can I end this?" I asked, calmer than I felt. I knew I couldn't run, not after what I had seen. Ike sighed, pushing the diary back to me. "You can't run, Morgan. The only way to deal with this is to understand exactly what Elisa invoked. But know this: it may be too late for you, just like it was for her." As I left the bar, Ike's words echoed like an anchor in my mind. "It may be too late for you." That repeated with every step I took through the deserted streets. The city seemed asleep, shrouded in a dense fog that I couldn't dissipate. The shadows in the corners, in the building entrances, seemed longer, as if they were closely following me. Reaching the apartment brought no relief. I closed the door with a dull thud and collapsed into the armchair. The disorder around me, which used to be a controlled reflection of my internal chaos, now seemed suffocating. The silence of the place had transformed, and the shadows that inhabited the corners of the room seemed to vibrate, almost as if they were waiting for something. Maybe for me. On the table, Elisa Lam's diary remained open like a scar I couldn't ignore. Its pages, full of symbols and disturbing words, screamed for my attention. I knew the answers I sought were there, or the end I feared. As I flipped through the diary once more, something I had missed before caught my attention. The last pages had been torn out. Someone, perhaps Elisa, or someone trying to protect her, had removed what likely contained the final instructions of the ritual. Without those pages, I was in the dark, and I couldn't stay that way for long. I lit another cigarette, my trembling hands trying to maintain some sense of control. Whatever was pursuing me, the shadows, the whispers, the constant cold, was getting closer every day. I needed to find those pages, and I knew exactly where to start. My search for answers led me to Evelyn Matthews, a former employee of the Cecil Hotel. She had worked there for over 30 years before disappearing from official records. Using old contacts, I got her address, a small, decrepit apartment on the outskirts of the city, in a building that seemed to be collapsing on itself. When I knocked on the door, the muffled sound of footsteps on the other side made me hesitate for a moment. Then the door slowly opened, revealing an elderly woman with tired, sunken eyes, as if life had drained all color from her. Evelyn recognized me immediately. "You're Morgan Graves," she said, without waiting for a response. "Come in." The apartment was suffocating, with windows closed for so long that the air seemed unbreathable. We sat in silence until Evelyn lit a cigarette, her trembling hands barely able to hold the lighter. She seemed as broken as the hotel she worked in. I knew someone would come asking about Elisa Lam again. Her voice was drawn out, laden with years of secrets she no longer wanted to carry. But the truth is, Elisa wasn't the first, and she won't be the last. Those words hit me like a punch. She wasn't the first. Evelyn exhaled the smoke slowly, her empty eyes seeming to fix on something beyond me. Many people disappeared in that hotel. Some were never found. Others appeared, but not in the way you'd imagine. They were connected to something bigger, something that lives in the shadows of that place. I leaned forward, feeling I was about to discover something important. "What do you know about the ritual? What was Elisa trying to do?" She hesitated, nervously putting out the cigarette. "She tore out the last pages of the diary for a reason, Morgan. They contained the final instructions of the ritual she was trying to complete. Elisa wanted to open a portal, and she succeeded." The silence between us was broken by a loud noise outside. Evelyn suddenly stood up, fear flooding her eyes. "They're here," she whispered. "You need to leave now." Before I could question her, Evelyn disappeared through the back door, leaving me alone with the weight of her words. I quickly left the apartment, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. The shadows were following me. They were getting closer. The path back to the Cecil Hotel felt suffocating. The streets were darker, the shadows longer, and the feeling that something was watching me was unbearable. Every step I took seemed to bring me closer to a truth that, deep down, I didn't want to find. But there was no turning back. When I arrived at the hotel that night, the lobby was deserted except for a sleepy clerk who barely lifted his eyes when he saw me. Better that way. I climbed the stairs with a lump in my throat, feeling the air grow heavier. The hotel seemed to be waiting for me, like a living creature ready to reveal its secrets. When I reached the basement, what I saw made my blood run cold. The air in the Cecil Hotel's basement was dense, as if the building itself was trying to swallow us. The shadows danced around, contorting into almost human, distorted forms, as if they were fragments of something lost. The circle on the floor vibrated with an ancient energy, a pulsating force that filled me with an unsettling feeling, a power that shouldn't be there. I could feel the weight of the darkness around me, pressing on my chest, making every breath more difficult. Rachel was there, standing by the circle. Her body trembled, and for the first time since I'd known her, she seemed completely off balance. There was no longer the usual determination in her eyes. What I saw now was pure, raw fear. She opened the door, Morgan, and now we're both marked. My hands clenched into fists, and for the first time, I realized that whatever she had done wasn't just a mistake. It was something bigger, much deeper. Why, Rachel? You knew what you were risking. My voice was colder than I intended, but she needed to understand that this wasn't a game. She averted her eyes, and I could see the despair in her features. I had no choice. Elisa was close to discovering something. I knew that if I followed her steps, I could understand what was really happening. I needed answers, Morgan. Her voice faltered. I needed to save myself. Is that all? My question was dry, almost brutal. Answers? She shook her head. It's not just that. Rachel finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a pain she tried to hide. I also heard the shadows, Morgan. They whispered to me, just like they did to Elisa. I thought I could control them, use what she discovered. But now they're hunting me. They know who I am. Rachel paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. I'm not strong enough to fight alone. That was the reason. It wasn't just the answers. It was fear. Rachel was trapped in a spiral of terror, seeking a way to stop the shadows before they consumed her. She tried to outsmart what was hunting her, but she failed. The shadows around us started to move again, like wolves scenting their prey before the final attack. I pulled Rachel away from the circle, my body on alert. I needed an exit quickly, but something in the circle caught my attention. Those symbols. Something was wrong. It wasn't just a common portal. Slowly, I approached, trying to ignore the distorted voices echoing through the walls. I crouched down, touching the cold stones that formed the symbols. That's when I realized. These symbols weren't made to open the portal. Not exactly. Rachel, still panting, looked at me. What do you mean? Elisa, she was used. These symbols don't open the portal by themselves. They weaken it. They make the barrier between the two worlds thinner, easier to break. Someone or something used Elisa to get here, and you just continued what she started. I stood up, brushing the dust off my hands. The real opening is yet to come. We're on the brink of something much worse, and the circle was manipulated to lure us into this. The shadows drew closer, and I knew time was running out. I looked at the symbols again, and the solution began to form in my mind. I remembered the nights I spent trying to understand what Ike Carver, with his mad gaze, explained about the supernatural. Symbols are keys. They don't open or close doors by themselves, but move the energy. You need to find the right rhythm. I needed to alter the energy's rhythm in the circle. It wasn't enough to move the stones or extinguish the candles. I had to use the shadows themselves against the portal. Rachel, I said, trying to keep my voice steady as the shadows approached. These shadows, they're attracted to the portal's energy, but they're also connected to it. We can use that to our advantage. How? Her voice was a whisper, almost hopeless. If we can draw the shadows into the circle while disrupting the energy flow, we can make the portal collapse on itself. But we'll need a distraction, I thought quickly, pulling from my coat a small bottle of alcohol that I always carried. I poured the contents around the circle, the shadows reacting instantly to the scent. Rachel watched me, still not understanding. When I light this, it'll destabilize the circle's energy, but only for a moment. You need to lure the shadows into the center. If you succeed, I'll close the portal for good. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to regain control over herself. And if it goes wrong, it'll go wrong if we don't try. I looked at her, my gaze firm. The only way to survive this is to close the circle with them inside. The fire lit up the circle. The shadows screamed in response, their distorted bodies being drawn to the light like moths. Rachel, now recovered, walked to the center of the circle, her presence forcing the shadows to follow her. I watched everything, every movement, waiting for the right moment. As soon as the last shadow entered the circle, I made the final move. I touched the central symbol and with a quick motion, broke one of the stones. The portal reacted instantly, roaring with indescribable force. The shadows inside the circle began to writhe, and one by one, they were sucked back into the void. The sound was deafening, but I kept moving the stones around the central symbol. With each movement, the portal weakened more until the last of the shadows disappeared completely. The silence that followed was absolute. The circle was now extinguished, dead. The darkness no longer moved. It was done. We left the hotel, the cold night air enveloping us like a hug. Rachel was silent, but I could see in her eyes that she understood what had happened. She had survived, but she was far from free. And so was I. Whatever it was that was in the Cecil Hotel was still out there, waiting for the next mistake, the next slip. Rachel finally broke the silence. We closed the portal, Morgan. But do you think it's over? I lit a cigarette, feeling the slight tremor in my hand as the smoke rose slowly. No, but for now, this is the best we can do. I took one last drag, the bitter taste bringing me back to reality. And if one day this cycle repeats, we'll be ready, or not. But I'll be there. Rachel nodded in silence. The cold wind blew through the street, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. The clock on the wall of my apartment read 3 in the morning. I was sitting in the armchair, the same one that had been my refuge for years, looking at the silent city through the window. Everything seemed calm outside, but inside me, the chaos remained. Since that night at the Cecil Hotel, something had changed. The shadows that once seemed distant figures were now closer than ever. The city lights flickered in the distance, and I tried to convince myself that it was over. The circle was closed. The shadows, for now, contained. But the feeling of being watched never completely disappeared. They were there, in the corners of the room, on the walls, waiting. Elisa Lamb's diary, now stored in the desk drawer, still weighed on my conscience. There was something in it that I didn't want to touch anymore, something that constantly reminded me that certain doors, once opened, never fully close. I had interrupted the ritual, closed the portal, but the answers I sought in that hotel were only part of something bigger. The phone rang on the other side of the room, a sharp sound that broke the silence like shattered glass. I didn't answer immediately. I just sat there, motionless, listening to the insistent ringing mix with my thoughts. Eventually, it stopped, and the silence returned to fill the space. But now it seemed denser, more dangerous. I looked at the table where the phone sat. A new mystery. Another shattered life asking for help. For years, I had sought answers to questions no one else wanted to ask. And each time I got involved in something bigger, something deeper, the weight I carried became more unbearable. But now, I was different. The phone rang again. The cigarette smoke rose slowly, blending with the shadows in the corner of the room. I extinguished the glowing tip and let the phone continue to ring. It no longer attracted me as it once did. The answers I sought didn't bring peace, only more questions. Maybe that was what drove me, the certainty that there is no end, just an endless cycle of darkness. The phone stopped ringing, but the silence brought no comfort. I got up from the armchair, feeling the weight of the last few days on my shoulders. I walked to the window and looked down at the city, the lights now distant and indifferent. The cold wind entered through the crack in the window and enveloped me, but it wasn't just the wind. The shadows were also there, in the darkness beyond the glass, and deep in my mind, I knew that one day I would have to return. The phone rang again. This time, I answered.